Never miss an episode of Create, Build, and Manage Daily again. Subscribe to our podcast and listen on the go.
Xiuhtezcatl is a musician, activist, and host of the podcast, The Last Resort, which follows the rise, fall, and rebirth of Cal Exit. X, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. No, we appreciate your time. Let's start with your roots. Talk about how your roots has influenced your art.
I grew up in Colorado. My dad is from Xochimilco, Mexico, and I grew up very closely to our traditional indigenous practices, ways of life, ceremonies, bits and pieces of our language, and that definitely created the foundation for a lot of my political and community activism, as well as my art and the storytelling that I've done, both within my community and the opportunities I've gotten to travel and as a performing artist and as a public speaker. And so that was definitely foundational for how I see the world, was this indigenous worldview.
Well, it's very unique, if I can say that, because you kind of understand different sides that a lot of us wouldn't understand. But what was it about the push to get California to secede from the U.S. that first got your attention?
I think it was less about Cal Exit and more so this conversation and this question about what kind of future are we heading towards? I think there was an undeniable truth that we grappled with while we made the show, that the country in many ways is falling apart and has been so for the last many years. And this idea around secession is one response to that. And so I was always curious about how do we tell this story in a way that invites our audience to imagine a greater range of possibilities for what the future can be. Because I think many of us can agree that the way things are happening in our country, politically, culturally, is very dysfunctional. So how can we move through that? Not necessarily touting Cal Exit as this solution that I really believe in, but it opened up the door to explore the deeper topics around our relationship to land, our relationship to indigenous peoples, and how that really lays a foundation for everything that our country is experiencing today, politically, around racial justice. So I think it was that greater invitation around imagining what our future could look like that really got me excited about this topic.
As you got into the topic and you started to do your research and interview people, what surprised you the most about this particular subject?
There were just some wild characters that came out of the woodworks to really give a very colorful spectrum of what our country looks like right now. I think California really is a microcosm of the greater country, because we have, self-proclaimed kind of progressive folks pushing for the secession to California. And then not even that many miles up north in Northern California, we were interviewing folks who were trying to secede from California and fighting kind of to push this far right agenda. And then we had indigenous activists and organizers that were fighting for land reclamation. So the array of characters and people that we brought to the table, different perspectives that we were able to sit down and invite into the conversation, really surprised me and put together a much richer story than I thought we were working with. So that was exciting for sure.
And your podcast, I'm assuming it's available wherever you get podcasts, right?
Everywhere you listen to podcasts.
That's awesome. And what do you hope as listeners tune in, because you certainly learned some things, and we got the image of what the podcast looks like on the screen there. What do you hope listeners walk away from after completing the season?
I think some of the most important takeaways and conversations I've had as people who have gone through the journey of listening to this very wild story is looking at how the crisis that we face as a country right now is so fundamental. And it manifests in many different ways, from political division to the climate crisis to racial injustice and economic inequity. And I think the foundation of those issues are really tied to the root of what this country represents. The groundwork, the foundation of enslavement, of white supremacy and genocide of indigenous peoples, that is really at the root of many of the issues we are looking at today. And the solutions are a response to that, of how we can build community, how we can grow and work together within the intersections of each other's communities, the intersections of each other's struggles for liberation. And I think that story is beautifully colored as much as the challenges are what this story is about. It's also looking at, well, what alternatives can we believe in and fight for? And I think it's a story of unity more than it is of secession and division.
And I understand you also wrote the music for the podcast. So I'm curious, what is next for your career? Are there any current projects you're working on that you can discuss tonight?
We're brainstorming and thinking about a potential second season for the show, which is really exciting. And myself and my brother Mato Ayuhi, who's another amazing indigenous composer, we worked on the music together. And so we're both individually working on a tour right now across the country to play shows in communities all over the place, as well as myself finishing up the album. So there's a lot in the works that I'm excited to continue to share with folks. 2023 is going to be a very big and exciting year. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. We produce a show in Texas. So we hear a lot about Texas succeeding the union. We don't hear so much about California. It'd be kind of curious to do the same kind of path in Texas and compare notes to see what is similar and what is different. But looking at your career, you really have had a lot of success early in your career with your music. You've done TED Talks, being named Time's Next 100 in 2019. So we have a lot of viewers that we affectionately refer to as entrepreneurs, people that are young themselves and wanting to have their own career. So I'm curious, what advice would you have for them tonight?
Everything I've ever done and built in my life has been community made and is not followed a common narrative of kind of pulling yourself up from your bootstraps and individually trying to attain a certain level of success or ambition. I think those things are important, but I think they have to be grounded in an understanding of who we are, of where we come from, of who surrounds us that helps lift us up. And I think what I would say to anybody is that the deeper that our relationships grow, the farther we'll go. Maybe not as quickly, but we will go farther if we're grounded in our community and the people around us. And we have an understanding of what it is we're fighting for, what it is that we're building towards, aside from just, certain metrics of success. I think have emphasis on what you can build individually, but also within the greater understanding of the collective that you're a part of.
And that kind of speaks back to what you're talking about. I mean, is it fair to say that us as a nation needs to get back to figuring out what we have more in common than talking about what we don't have in common? Is that kind of what you feel? Is that how you feel?
I feel that as an ingredient of it, and another part is understanding, well, what are the things at the foundation fundamentally that have shaped this country that we have to unpack and really address and bring to the surface in order for us to go forward.
It's good stuff. And the podcast, again, is called The Last Resort. Thank you so much for that information. Sounds fascinating. Again, you can catch it anywhere you download your podcast. Just look for The Last Resort. We're back right after this.